Hey, it's Jesse, Time and Refinement. Welcome back to the channel. Let's dive right in. Religion is a necessary evil, and I wouldn't really go so far as to say it's evil in the sense of malevolent. However, it does teeter on being more of a detriment than a good in most cases, and the reason for this is because religion is weaponized to begin with. It is something that people really need, and they need to refer to it. And the problem with religion really is that it gives you a list of things to do and not to do, and you really operate within those margins. And anything outside of it is forbidden. And that's a big problem, right? Because then that tells you that you cannot question it because you are already within these margins. So you're lost if you try to go outside of it, if you try to question any of it, right? And as you can imagine, that brings up some problems for anyone in any religion. And I only know for myself that when I was hardcore, when I was a practicing Christian, right, when I would go to lengths to defend what the Bible says, what the Bible teaches, I would just constantly dig myself a grave. And this happens for some people and not others. Of course, there are what's known as cultural Christians, people who sort of follow it for the socialization, for the friendship. Totally fine. But if you're going to do that, then at least admit that you're just using religion for that means, as the means to that end, right? Because if you're not really following the religion, and again, unfortunately, it is very vague to say you're following Christianity because of how many denominations there are, because of how vague it is to even follow Christianity. So really what you're doing is creating a version of it that is tailored to your needs. And as you can imagine, that's also problematic because then your needs are your subjective interpretation of the text, which I don't even have to explain why that's problematic, right? So what happened with me really was I wanted to study the Bible. I wanted to know what it was about. I wanted to understand it. And the problem with understanding this series of texts is that you can't really get to anything substantial because of how clearly gray it is, most of it, right? We're not talking about the historical passages of war and all this. That stuff is pretty cut and dry. But the important stuff, the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the scriptures are clearly very vague in many ways. Of course, when you get into the New Testament, people will talk about how, well, no, it's not vague. He's outlining how to live your life and the morals and the teachings from Christ. But the problem with that stuff is even then it does still get a little vague, right? Because then you have Trinitarians, you have Unitarians, you have people that believe Jesus was just a prophet. So it gets more and more subjective the harder you look at it, as with everything, of course. But with the Bible, it often is, it becomes worse as you examine it further, because the harder you try to come up with some sort of framework for your biblical or your Christian beliefs, inevitably, the more rigid you will become and the more insufferable you really will become. And I can only speak for myself that I knew I was this person at a certain point in time. When I really wanted to understand the Bible the way I thought it should be interpreted, and believe me, no one has gone to the lengths that I have. Okay, not necessarily. Some people have. But I went into the the Greek, the Aramaic, the Hebrew. I was determined to make sense of it because it didn't make sense to me. So I figured I want to learn this. I want to get it right, which should be everyone's goal. If you're a Christian, if you're in a religion, that should be your goal, is to get it right, because that is your standard for life. So if your standard is wrong, guess what that means for your practical everyday situations that you find yourself in. And then you need to refer to your belief system. So as you can imagine, this had many issues for me, which came up throughout my life. And ultimately, I really had my head so far up that region when I was a Christian that I was blind to seeing what was seemingly obvious to not only other people, but it should have been obvious to me. And I think this is just largely what religion does in general, is it gives you such bad tunnel vision that you cannot act outside of the tunnel. And those problems are self-apparent, right? Or those issues are self-evident. They come to light quickly because if you've ever debated someone like me when I was a hardcore Christian, then you know that it's impossible to get stimulus into my brain in a way that made sense. I'm not saying all Christians are like this, but if at least one person, me, was like this, we can be certain that other Christians are in fact like this, where there is no amount of convincing, there's no amount of open-mindedness that you can offer in order for them to see it differently. It's just the fact. And does this mean religion is just across the board terrible, bad? No, of course not. Religion, as I said, is a necessary evil. A lot of people really do need religion because if they didn't have it, it would mean a lot of times confronting the harsher truths that reality offers, which is that it's cold, it's bleak, it's unforgiving, which is the opposite of religion. So, religion it's a crutch that people need because it gives them a sense of purpose, technical difficulties. Anyway, back to the topic, which was that religion is a crutch. And all I know is what I can say for myself, which was that religion, as far as when I was a strong, devout Christian, right, all this stuff, I was the most narrow-minded, pig-headed ass, to be honest. And although I hadn't gone as far as some do, if you're a Baptist or if you're more on fire for the Lord, as it were, you can definitely take it further. And, ultimately people have to come to terms with that on their own time and just realize that, not that all that time was for nothing. Sure, you can have connections or seeds that are planted that grow into something beautiful when you encounter another, follower or whatever, or when you reach someone via Christ. Something's beautiful can come from that, and a lot of times that's necessary for people. If they kind of screw their life up, if they go down the DRUGS route, and they need an anchor to come back to. And a lot of times that is Christianity. That is something that helps people. And, for that, I have nothing negative to say about that. Whether or not that's the correct means to actually help someone, the fact is that it works for people. And to that, I just say, yes, I would rather have it that people actually do their works to help people. They use their works to help people, right? Buy them food and clothes, trying to get them to kick the habit. But, Christians a lot of times are not even doing this. They're just saying, yeah, come to church. We'll help you out. And for the emotional side of things, that's beneficial a lot of times. is it helps people to regulate their emotions, to pour out all of their anger, resentment, sadness, frustration when they go to church and worship. And, that's fine. I think it's fine. Do I think it's how it should be? Absolutely not. I think that people need to take more active steps towards actually helping someone rather than the passive approach of just come to church, bro. Come on. We need to get you in. We need to get the numbers in the building, right? Never mind the fact that Jesus wouldn't want this at all. That's another topic. And I don't want to get too off topic again. But in closing, I have to say that if you're religious, all I can ask is that you would maintain an open mind. Assume that you may be wrong. Everyone should get to this point in their life where you just say you don't know. You just say, I could be wrong about all this. In my opinion, that is the healthiest place to be at. It's not for everyone, of course, but it is a point where everyone should get to at some point, I think. And you can find a lot of interesting things when you're there. You can find out a lot of things about yourself that you wouldn't have discovered had you been so close-minded. So that's all I have to say for tonight. I hope you are well and at peace with your own mind. Make sure to take it easy on yourself. All right. Have a good one.